Hello, everybody. I want to talk about persuasion. Persuasion is an interesting subject. It's one nearly everyone you meet is going to have a perspective about. Some people think that they're highly influential. We'll learn more in a bit that persuasion has to do with influence. I'm highly influential. I can persuade anyone to do anything I want. In fact, when you look at great leaders of our time and of all time, they often have this singular characteristic of being able to persuade others, if not an entire country, in order to follow their path. We hope, as we'll conclude this discussion with, that they're good and decent and honorable people, and they persuade people to do good in their life, not necessarily to do bad. Regardless, persuasion is one of those topics that is interesting to converse about. Most of us would like to be able to have that ability to persuade somebody to do something that we find is meritorious. Whether it's just our wives or our husbands or spouses, our children, or even someone we work with, whether they're our supervisors or subordinates. In fact, the workplace is a great place to have the ability to persuade others. We would like to persuade our vendors to offer us some raw materials or some products at a reduced cost. We would like to persuade our customers to purchase our product or our service, even if the price is too high or if a competitor has a better product. We'd like to persuade our supervisor to give us a better evaluation, maybe one that we don't deserve. And we would like to persuade our subordinates to do a better job in their job, so that we as their supervisor can maybe take credit for the great job that they're doing. It certainly would make us look better. So persuasion, or the ability to influence, is an important trait that we want to acquire so that over the longer term, as a result of having the ability to persuade, we can achieve our ambitions. So what is persuasion? And what do we mean by this term, persuasion? Well, it's an attempt to shape or change behaviors about an individual cause or an issue. Every few years, we go through elections in the United States. And you have, in essence, two political parties, Democrats and Republicans. Each are trying to persuade a number of people to, at least at that point in time, to see the issues from their point of view. It's a highly politicized environment in which we live. And so the main goal is to try to figure out how those uncommitted, which we call independent, individuals are going to vote over that period of time. And so we try to look at an issue from their point of view, the independents, so that they vote either a Republican or Democrat, depending on who's trying to persuade at that particular time. So persuasion is not necessarily something that's confined to our friends, our family, even our organization. We find that we can't go through life, we can't go through a day without being persuaded in one way or another. All we have to do, in fact, is turn on the television. Television will tell us that we want you to buy a certain type of soda, to buy a certain type of house, to go and purchase this type of home product. That ability to persuade somebody via media, whether it's television or radio or any type of social type media, really is an art that we've tried to learn because it can be so profitable if we can do so. So that is in relation to, persuasion is often related to an issue, but it also can be an individual, as we talked earlier, whether it's your family. It also could be a cause. Some of the more prominent causes that we see today in relation to the environment, where the green environment, and to be more green in the way that you interact throughout your day and act throughout your day, that is becoming certainly a significant part of the ability to persuade others about climate change. So persuasion is a fundamental component of the world in which we live, and it's not limited to just individuals, causes, or issues. It's really about the ability because that's what we try to acquire, the ability to influence someone to believe in something the same as you do. The ability to get somebody to act in the same way that you want them to. So whether it's an act or a belief, we're trying to persuade, influence other people to do exactly what we want them to do. Sounds nefarious, right? Sounds like, well, that shouldn't be a very good thing to do. And it's not. So again, as we're going to conclude this presentation, it really is about being a good, decent, and honorable person, and then trying to convince, influence, persuade other people to do the same thing. If we all had noble aims, and we were pursuing those noble aims in a decent and honorable way, what better way can we achieve those aims, or at least expand those aims, than to influence others to do the same thing we are? That's the hope, at least. So now we know what persuasion is. Influence is a term we've used quite a bit already. Some people say it's very synonymous to persuading. It is similar, except that one's ability to persuade another gives them some influence on the course of action of a particular person. In essence, influence is a derivative of persuasion. We want to be able to persuade somebody so that we can then influence them to do what we want. So influence really relies on the ability of one person to influence has to change, which is what we're really looking for, to change another person's attitudes, beliefs, ideas, perceptions. So it's the ability, if you can influence, you have that ability to change another person's attitudes, beliefs, ideas, and perceptions. And that is the goal of persuasion. Influence is a component of persuasion, and the hope is that through persuasion and through influence, we can create some sense of dependency. Influence comes from creating this dependency. And we mean this in the most positive of terms. A good example is if you rely on someone to provide you some monies every month to live, then that person can influence you, and they can influence you because you're dependent on them. A supervisor that evaluates you on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, an annual basis. That supervisor has influence over you, and therefore you have a sense of dependency vis-a-vis that supervisor. Your monthly salary, annual increases, if not potential promotions, all come from your supervisor. That influence creates that dependency. As an aside, we hope to lessen that dependency. We don't want to be dependent on another person. And the best way that you can lessen that dependency is to never depend on one individual and to have a wide variety, a wide number of options in your life. If you have options in your life and somebody is trying to influence you in a manner in which you don't want to be influenced, you can always leave. As an example, if part of your job is sales and your supervisor is indicating that in order for you to keep your job, you need to increase your sales, and maybe you need to be less honest about the true nature of your product or service, and you need to lie to customers in order to get their sales, to get their business. If you don't have any options, you may be more inclined to do so, even though it's maybe against everything that you have been taught and everything in the way that you live. But since you're dependent on somebody else, you leave yourself vulnerable to maybe making those decisions. And the way that you can lessen that dependency is to have choices, which we call options in life. When you have options, when you can go somewhere else, then a person has less influence over you. And if they have less influence over you, they have less ability to persuade you. But influence comes from creating dependency. It's what you must have, and there's only one or two or three persons or organizations that have what you need. And dependency comes because what you need is important, What you need is scarce, and what you need is non-substitutable. So if it's important, for instance, if you need a certain prescription medicine, it is important for your health. Therefore, you need that medicine. And if there's only one place, one vendor that sells that medicine, no matter the cost, you're going to need to pay it. That's very similar to scarce. If what you want is scarce, then they can certainly raise the price that may be charged for that product or service, and you may have to pay it. Heating and air conditioning are good examples. You typically don't have an option to shop around in order to get the best price. That's one reason why capitalism, which is a form of economy in the United States and with other countries as well, creates competition, and via competition it reduces the influence and the persuasive ability of a vendor. If only one person sells a product and therefore it's something that you need, then they can charge nearly anything they want for it, because not only is it important, but it's scarce. It's also the third aspect, which is non-substitutable, which means that that is the product that you need. It is important. It is scarce. There's not a number of vendors that make this product, and there's nothing you can substitute it with. To make a really simple analogy, if you like potato chips, there's numerous vendors that make potato chips. In fact, you can even make your own. And so there's less influence and less persuasion ability by those that make potato chips, because there's so many options that somebody can choose. But if it was a product and they only make one of it, and that person who makes it, no one else has the recipe or ability to do so, they almost can charge whatever they would like. And because it's important, scarce, and non-substitutable, you would have to pay that price. So persuasion has a tremendous history in terms of the good it can do for a country. It also can do quite bad. And again, we're going to talk more about that. So what are some of the concepts of persuasion and influence? Persuasion implies what we call intentionality. It's an individual must attempt to persuade or influence you. So if you're a persuasive person, or if you're an influencer is a term that we use today mainly in social media. For instance, there's some quite famous actors and actresses who will try to sell a product on Twitter or Snapchat or even Facebook, and they influence people to buy that product. In fact, there's some people who aren't an actor and actress, but they have quite a huge following on the internet, and as a result, they become an influencer. And those influencers get invited to a host of events, because if they were to leave an event like an art showing or the opening of a new store or the launch of a new product, they want to invite these influencers to see these products. In fact, they may even give them free products or services with the hope that they will go home and tweet or post messages to their thousands or hundreds of thousands of individuals in order to buy the products. In fact, I was on a plane some time ago, and they had told us that they were going to be shooting a commercial on that plane. At the time, we had the ability, if you didn't want to be in the commercial, we can sit in other parts of the plane. But it was a promotion between Southwest Airlines, and they had a person who I had never heard of, but they were an influencer on the internet. They had millions of people who follow their tweets and their posts. In fact, my children knew of this person, though I didn't. And they were shooting this commercial, which was going to be shown online, and it was to promote the new version of one of those handheld gamers. And as a result of us being on the plane, they actually gave every one of us one of those new models of the handheld gaming machines. So it was quite nice, but the reason why they had this person on the flight, and they were shooting this commercial on the flight, was because they knew that this person would go back, and they had millions of people who followed them. They were able to, at that point, post some positive messages about this new version of this product, and it was a great way to sell the product online. So that is an example of intentionality. They weren't just going to say that this is a new product. They were going to go out there and actively try to persuade or influence a group of people. It's a more proactive action by one person to influence the actions of others. We do know, of course, that the ability to persuade and influence is infinite. So there's literally few people in the United States and throughout the world who can, at least if they have access to an internet, and nearly most people do, that you have an ability to influence somebody as long as they're on the internet in some form or capacity. It's the same when television used to dominate, though in some ways it still does. The Super Bowl can reach 100 to 120 million people. So it's infinite as far as the number of people that can be influenced by what's on the television in relation to the Super Bowl. And so what we try to remember in relation to the concept of persuasion and influence is that it's intentional that we use it to build up a reservoir of trust and honor and a following, and then not use it in some way or fashion betrays what we know about persuasion and influence, which is it's created in order to be utilized. And as an example, in politics, which we mentioned earlier, there's some people who were in politics some years ago, President Barack Obama as an example, and he will make an announcement that he's going to campaign for those who are looking for political office. And he is no longer in office, but he has the ability to persuade and influence simply by virtue of who he is and what he has done. And so there's a host of people who want to take advantage of that ability of him to still persuade, still influence a wide host of people in order to see things the way Barack Obama does. So this intentionality is a key point. There's a number of evil, pervasive, and persuasive techniques, and we're going to end with some of the positive ones, but we should talk about some of the evil ones first, because they can do a tremendous damage in an organization, but also in society. The foot in the door, I think we've all had this example where somebody asks for something small, but then they want something larger. So you can have two groups. One has a small sign, the other one doesn't. And they did this study. They had two groups of women. One asked to put a small sign in the yard and the others not. When they were asked to put a larger sign, 76% of women who put the small sign first agreed, only 17% when they hadn't put the sign before. And they did it with men too. When you'll see with this foot in the door is that they're going to segment society into certain areas because that may sell more. But then they try to expand it to nearly every aspect of societies. There's some products that they sell to certain genders or to certain races, but then they always want to expand that footprint once they get in the door to sell to everyone. But you find out who your target market is first, and then you expand from there. So if you get someone to buy something small, the hope is that you can come back later and buy something larger. A good example, if you look at car companies, they usually have a fairly inexpensive car to start with to get into the market. They're hoping that younger people, who typically have less money, will buy that starter car. But then the hope is that they enjoy that car, and as they make more money, they want to get a larger, better car. And that's the concept between Honda which for a number of years had the Civic and the Accord. Now they have Acura. And so if you like Honda cars and feel that they're well made, the thought is as you make more money that you'll get an Acura, which is still in the same Honda family. That also occurs with Toyota. Toyota has, of course, the Toyota cars, but they created Lexus some years ago so that people who want a more a version of Toyota that has more features, then they can move on to the Lexus. Mazda has Infiniti. So they all have their brands. They're more luxury types of brands. Luxury has a higher profit, and so all of those car makers want to have a higher profit. Door in the face is kind of the opposite of the foot in the door. That's where you ask for something something large first, knowing that people are going to say no, and then you say, well, if you don't want that, what about this? So you started high, and you knew that people would not want that, but then you're going to come back and say, well, if you can't get the bundle, what about just the one component of it? Lowballing is where you're asked to do something without getting the whole story. So you're asked to move something down the hall, then to the garage. So the first was to move it to the garage, but they knew you wouldn't say that. So then they just say, well, what if you just move it down the hall a little bit? You're obligated, once you start this action, to complete it. The expression that you often hear is, well, if you would have told me that from the beginning, I wouldn't have done it. That's, of course, exactly why they did this concept called lowballing. They knew if they told you everything that you needed to do, that you would never have done it. So they started small. And once you've committed yourself, then you feel obligated. And that's what happens with gas prices in a way. They don't raise gas prices to a significant degree. They usually raise them pennies, and the next thing you know, it's been a sizable increase. The last one that we'll talk about is investing your time. And so this happens with car dealerships especially. It can take hours to purchase a car. And what they hope is that you go in and you at least see the cars first. And then they want to talk to you about the cars for a considerable amount of time. And the thought is the more time that you spend with somebody, that not only do they have a greater chance to influence you, but then you may start feeling guilty that you've taken up so much of their time, you have to buy something. You have to do something. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to buy a car, but if somebody spends a considerable amount of time with you and they're a salesperson and you're not, then you may feel like, wow, I've taken up so much of their time, I should at least buy something. That leads us to maybe the most important part of our presentation, which is how best can you persuade somebody? There's certainly a number of techniques that you can follow. First is to be a good person. People are drawn to and follow those who are good. Our most important aspect is to be good. And then we encourage those people to persuade others. And throughout the television, you'll find quite a few individuals, especially if you look at commercials, who are deemed good people, and people know that they're considered good by not only their fans, but other people. And so people who make products and services will want that person to be a spokesperson for their product, knowing that people say, well, that's a good person. If they're telling me to do this, then it should be a good product and I should try it. In television, they have what's called a Q rating, and that shows your popularity, but also your trustworthiness by others who may know you. And the thought is that if you have a high Q rating, then that's who people who are selling products and services want to be associated with. The second persuasive technique is to have some credibility. So not just being a good and decent and honorable person, but also establishing some credibility. There was a great commercial some years ago by E.F. Hutton. And E.F. Hutton was a brokerage firm like Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab. And E.F. Hutton, the commercial was an individual was talking to another individual, and he goes, I was talking to my stockbroker at E.F. Hutton, and everybody's quiet. As soon as they hear the word E.F. Hutton, everybody's quiet. And the thought was that when E.F. Hutton speaks, other people listen. That's credibility. And as a result of that commercial, E.F. Hutton became quite popular. And people thought, wow, this may be a stock brokerage firm that I may want to pay considerable attention to. A third persuasive technique is to be respectful of your audience. To be influential, you have to be influenced yourself. You have to be able to have this type of conversation with those that you come in contact with. And so if you present yourself really as a person that people want to have a conversation with, people are in some ways drawn into, similar to being a good person, but they enjoy the art of conversation. They feel as if you're listening to them. That's a type of persuasive technique that really can pay off tremendously in establishing the relationship between individuals. And if you have this type of relationship, because you're respectful to your audience, then they may be influenced by you and you may be influenced by them. That is very similar to the superior conversational and presentation skills. You just have a sense of magnetism about you. This last bullet is often referred to as charisma. People are drawn to you because you have that innate ability for people to feel good around you. There's a great story about Jacqueline Kennedy, who was the former First Lady of the United States. She was married to John F. Kennedy. And her dad always told her to hold something back because it'll make people want to see what that is. It make people more intrigued about who you are because they don't know everything about you. And she did that. She never gave an interview. I think she may have given one, but not an in-depth interview after she left the White House. So people were always intrigued about her because there was very little that they knew about her. If you know everything about a person, it in some ways will reduce that interest in knowing more. But being a persuasive person, being an influential person, starts when people think that you're a good person. And also, secondly, the two of the most important ones are at the top of the slide, which is they see you as a really trustworthy person. If they're saying that this good or product or service is meritorious, if they're, if you, as a person who has credibility, are promoting this product, then you must really believe it. And therefore, since I admire you and I have great faith and trust in what you say, I'll do the same thing as well. That's persuasiveness. That's influence, which we hope to have whether we're an employee or an employer, whether we're just a citizen or a high political leader. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the day.